Check one. Hey. Live in a second here.
Nice.
C-Jam?
C-Jam.
Let's do it. We got our 6 feet between each of us here. Perfect. A 1, 2, a 1, 2, All right, guys. Well, I am Dave Strong.
Hey there, I'm Hilson.
And Matt McIntyre.
And yeah, we are doing our first ever jazz live stream, so excuse if we're slightly awkward. I think I'm looking directly at the camera here. But what this is all about is, hey, we're kind of out of the public a little bit, and starting tomorrow we're going to be working and streaming and recording videos from our homes. But today we figured we'd keep a little social distancing here and try to put on a little performance, answer any questions that you might have. And yeah, really, if we have any requests, put them through on the chat as well. I saw a couple questions come through already from Richard and Michelle here about saxophone equipment. I don't want to make this too saxophone heavy, so I'll keep it pretty brief. But as far as my alto saxophone setup, I'm playing a Selmer Mark 6 with a Meyer 7. It's one that a guy named Phil Engelman worked on. He's a great mouthpiece refacer out of Oregon originally. Now he lives in France because he married a French woman, so he gets to live over there. But Phil worked on that, and that's nice, especially with the stock mouthpieces, having a little bit of refacing, make sure everything's even on there, made it play really well. So big shout out to Phil. And then Lavaz medium reed, and I think Meyer or Meyer type mouthpieces are great lead alto mouthpieces, especially alto because it can be a little brighter. I can get a loud pop and rock sound out of it, but I can also get a real classic big band or lead alto sound, all the way down to smaller group combo stuff, so super flexible. On tenor, I'm playing an old Berg Larson. For years I played an RPC that I dropped about a year ago, unfortunately, and shattered. But this is an old 120/1. It's a bigger tip opening. It's a bigger baffle than my alto piece. I think tenor sometimes you can use a little bit more oomph with a Lavaz medium reed. And this one actually was refaced by a couple people. First, a guy named Brian Powell worked on it. And later, Theo Wani touched up and he came in here and did a clinic, so I got him to do some work on it for me. He brought it down to a 116. But this one, yeah, this is a little bit more punchy piece. I play a lot of pop and rock and wedding gigs and stuff, so this gives me a little bit extra oomph on that. And then a Selmer Series 3 tenor that I've had for about 20 years and is done well for me. So really it's about finding what's a good fit for you and finding what's a good fit for the style of music you're playing. Both of my setup is just to try to be as versatile as possible because I'm playing small group stuff sometimes and I'm playing screaming kind of rock and pop stuff a lot of the time. So saxophone gear aside, let's talk a little bit about jazz and jazz performance. One of the things we get asked, or I get asked a lot, I'm sure you guys do as well, by students, is how do you start improvising? How do you start getting going on that first solo? And when you're young and you haven't done it before, it can be kind of terrifying. And so just a few tips and tricks. We're going to talk through some different things between tunes here. But my biggest advice at first would be keep it simple. Play rhythmically. If you listen to the melody of the song we just played, a song named Seep Jam Blues, it's... That's basically the whole song right there. And so if you're playing a solo, yeah, it's fun to play a lot of notes, and the more you practice, the more material you can get there. But boy, most people really love if you just play a melodic solo. And really, I'm just playing blues scale stuff there. And you can do a lot by starting quiet, starting with a little more subtle sound, and then building into playing loud and playing with a lot more emphasis. And really just dynamic contrast and always be thinking rhythmically. And, the next part is, it sounds boring, but knowing your scales, knowing your modes, that's how I know, a blues scale will fit over this D scale. So, improvisation can be scary. And my first teacher long ago wasn't a jazz player and just said, improv is just play whatever you want. That's terrifying. That's really terrifying. So what I'd say is build yourself a framework. Have some scales, have some modes, have a few things that you know work, and then just think musically. And don't be afraid to play the melody of the song and quote the melody of the song while you're taking a solo. People, some of the jazz standards are beautiful, beautiful melodies. So being able to reference and have people know what song you're playing while you're playing it by your solo is important. It's nice. Any thoughts from either Keith or Matt, or should we move on? You want to talk a little bit about the same stuff?
This might lead into, or kind of off of your topic there, Dave. We had somebody ask about particular, I think referencing saxophone here, but I think this is a concept that really applies to all of us as instrumentalists. How do we build our speed, our facility, our technique, right? How do we improve that? And I think one instrument to the next, we understand there are technical differences in how we play, what I do versus what Matt does versus what Dave does, but I suspect how the process that we work on developing that speed and that accuracy and control are probably very similar. So since it was kind of geared towards you, what do you...
Sure. Yeah, I think we're all going to say the same thing, but it's a matter of starting slow and building up muscle memory. And when I'm practicing a fast tune or a lick, let's say I want to play. I'm not, I remember listening to a student practice and they were trying to play the song Donnelly and they went. And you could just hear them, they'd never get there. And then the key is you set your metronome on like 60 or something like that. And then I set it to 62. Now, as you get faster, you're going to realize that maybe the way you play something slower is going to be different than the way you play it faster. And so you're going to have to get more efficient with your fingerings, your efficiency, which I still work on all the time because I have some terrible flying fingers sometimes. But yeah, starting slow and building it up so that you could play it in your sleep. I remember for one of my college audition pieces, I played a Charlie Parker solo that was just burning fast. And actually, Keith and I worked together at Valley Fair. This is like 20 years ago.
Right.
And he'd probably heard me play that thing for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And at the end of 3 months, it sounded like it was easy for me, but it was because I spent 3 months working on it. And, multiply that by the next 20 years, and it's a matter of slowly building. And nothing I play fast is off the top of my head. I promise you. It's always, the creative stuff is when I slow down, if I'm ever going to be creative. When I'm playing fast, it's bits and pieces of things that I've worked on for 20, 30 years. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's the same thing for both Matt and I think, as well. And in particular, take the time to start off slow. Like David mentioned, so much of this becomes muscle memory. We can talk about some other musical ideas with this, but so much of what we're doing in developing, we'll talk some different about, patterns and licks, and we're going to talk about, different scales and modes and pentatonics. The reason we do all of this is we're just trying to develop a language here, right? And just like when we're speaking extemporaneously, when we're talking just like this, we're interacting back and forth on the stream here right now. All of this is just off the top of our head, but how do we know how to combine all this together? Because we spent the time learning this verbiage and internalizing it, where we don't have to think about how to describe something, it just comes to us. This is what this is all about, this process of building up that security in the language, right? So that we have all of this off our fingers, but the only way to develop that is by spending the time, spending the practice with it, doing some of the woodshedding, and talking about a few ideas that we're going to go through here as well. So let's play another tune here. We're going to play if there's a standard out there, especially in a little bit more of the modern jazz settings, I think this is it. This is a tune called So What, and we're going to have a few different ideas. We're going to talk about this after the fact.
And someone just mentioned turn up the gain. I turned it up a bit. Let me know if it's too much, but we should have a little bit more volume there. We'll have to talk as close to the mic as possible because I guess we're not getting all that through. But Keith, you've got a question. I played trombone for 3 years and I still leak air out the side of my lips sometimes. Do you guys have any tips that can help me with that?
Yeah.
And someone gave a shout out to Matt for being an awesome bass player.
Yeah.
So
And he taught me bass when I was younger. So.
nice. Inside source.
Nice. So good, Sydney. Okay, so for us non-brass players out there, just to give you a kind of a quick idea of what's going on here. When we're playing a brass instrument, what's happening is our embouchure, or our lips, are vibrating, thus creating sound. So saxophone, woodwinds, the reed against the mouthpiece is creating this vibration for us brass players. It's the lips vibrating that is creating this initial vibration of sound, and then the instrument just goes and refines that. And amplifies it here. So what we're talking about is in the corners of the mouth, we're leaking a little bit of air here. So there are a couple different things I would think of about that with that right away here. So first off, sometimes we'll see this happen, for example, in the lower register. When we're playing brass instruments, what's changing the frequency as we're moving through the different registers are just subtle little variations in the shape of the lips that create the different vibration combined with different airspeed here. So for example, as I go from lower register to upper register, I'm increasing my airspeed, which is allowing my lips to move faster, and I'm making subtle little changes. Sometimes I'm thinking about maybe my corners of my mouth coming in a little bit, but honestly not all that much. A lot of it's happening more in the middle with what we call the aperture here. So the aperture closes a little bit to allow it to move faster, and then we're moving that faster air as well. So how do we fix the leaking corners of the embouchure here? A couple things. First off, I would make sure that we're feeling like we're keeping our corners secure. When I'm playing, a lot of times I feel like my corners of the mouth are anchored, a lot of times kind of down by what they call kind of the eye teeth. So just sitting down kind of on the, your bottom jaw here. and I'm keeping everything nice and firm, not tight, not tense. We don't want to be thinking tense here, but I'm just keeping things supported here. And even as I'm going into the lower register where we want to be using slower air, we want to be opening up the jaw, the embouchure, the oral cavity to help promote the slower airflow, I'm still keeping things supported here. When we don't, we may be getting some of this air leakage happening. And the other thing too is we may be changing the timbre as well. We may be getting a muffled sound. The response in that lower register, the control may suffer as well. So thinking about keeping the corners of the embouchure just firm in place. One thing maybe think about, I've seen this happen a couple of times here, is if we are using sometimes maybe a little bit too small of a mouthpiece. I've seen this in particular if you're somebody who's still playing on your beginning starter mouthpiece and you're trying to shove all of this air and all of this lip structure into too small of a mouthpiece. Sometimes the lips just need more room to vibrate, and so we can get some of that leakage as well there. So I would suggest maybe taking a look if you're playing on your beginning mouthpiece or a way too small of a mouthpiece, that may be having an impact as well. If you have questions about that, you can of course reach out to me here, hit me up on our channel or shoot me an email, tromboneshop@trentmusic.com. I'm happy to help kind of diagnose however I can with any of that. So I hope that's helpful here. Let's talk about so what for just a minute here. Dave was talking about some ideas about getting started in jazz improvisation, what we're doing with this, what kind of ideas we want to be thinking about.
We just had a question about pentatonics too. So.
Oh, perfect. So it's a really scary concept because for a lot of us, I think we feel like I still remember being given my first solo in jazz band, and it's that fear of not only just getting in front of everybody and playing. I mean that can be a scary experience, but also what do we play? Right? What do I actually play? If we're given freedom, you can play anything you want. That's incredibly daunting. So one of the things I really highly encourage is don't just play anything. In fact, we don't want to just play anything. That doesn't work in most modern jazz settings. I mean, we have certain things like free jazz, for example, but even there are a whole set of different rules that they're following. There's always structure to what they're doing. We have a whole number of different, constraint structures within jazz improvisation, which are all style appropriate, which makes sense in how the style has developed. But even within that, we can give ourselves even more structure as well. And so, there's any number of different things we can use to create that structure. We can give ourselves some rules, some things to pay attention to melodically. We can do things harmonically. We can be thinking about rhythms. We can say, I'm only going to play one certain kind of rhythm. I'm going to play in this dynamic. I want to create this kind of mood. One of the easiest places for us to get started is by thinking about giving ourselves some melodic and harmonic constraints. In other words, giving ourselves one simple scale or a simple set of scales that we can use versus trying to play everything here. So one easy way we can do that is with either things like the blues scale or a pentatonic scale. These are scales that only have 5 or 6 notes, but there are a lot of things we can do within that. So,
and while you're picking it up, is that a King 3B?
this is a King 3 as a matter of
Question
fact.
that too.
Yep, absolutely, King 3B. This has been my horn for, boy, I think we're going on 20 years now. I love it. I talked about this on my live stream earlier this week. There may be a better horn out there for me right now, but I still have to bring it back to this. This horn has done a lot of great things for me over the years. So, pentatonic scale. So, penta meaning 5, right? These are 5-note scales. And they're, depending on the mode, whether we're talking major, whether we're talking minor, or different variations, there can be different sets of notes. So what is in the key of D minor? So what we can use is essentially either a D minor pentatonic, or when we change chords, when we change tonality, then we can move to an E flat pentatonic minor scale. So pentatonic, 5 notes. What we typically use are the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 7th note of the minor scale. And when we're talking about minor scale, in jazz settings, again, we're typically referring to Dorian, right? Now, in this particular case, you could actually use a natural minor scale and accomplish the same thing. But again, in most jazz settings, we're actually thinking either about Dorian or jazz minor scales, which are another thing we won't talk about here. So this would sound like. So just 5 notes, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7. And of course, you can do it in different registers. Or in the lower register, whatever you might have there. And then, of course, the E flat minor pentatonic would be the same 5 notes of the E flat Dorian scale, or E flat minor scale there, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7. And so using these very, very simple ideas, they can give us structure. So instead of having to worry about all of our different note choices, we can think about some of these other ideas. I can think about what I want to do not harmonically, I can think about what I want to do rhythmically. I can think about what I want to do dynamically, what I'm trying to say with the mood of the song here. So tell you what, if it's all right, maybe let's just do you want to split a chorus? So what?
Yeah, and before that, we've had 2 people ask for us each to talk about, well, 2 things, a funk tune and our most influential players. We'll get to that soon, so we're going to do a funk tune after this, but let's first do this
Got
part
it.
here.
So we're going to split a chorus. I mean, we're going to play half chorus each of So What, and we're going to challenge ourselves to really just stick with our minor pentatonic scales.
Yeah.
Given within that, what can we use instead of, it doesn't have to be just, we can hopefully be a little more creative than that. Let's hear what we can do.
We'll see.
Okay, good. All right, so 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Good. And I think we were maybe trying to over-exaggerate. I was trying to keep things really, really simple, but I was trying to think as melodically as I can. Okay, how can I play around with these 5 notes and try to actually create a pleasing melody to the ear? That's really the whole goal, I think, of all of us. And sometimes it's really easy to forget when we're trying to think all of these technical ideas and all of these different modes and scales and alterations and how fast can I play and how much information can I try to cram into
a nice way
a
to
solo.
step back, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole goal, I've been many jazz musicians have said this, their whole thought process is, I want to create a melody that's pleasing to the listener. That's, that can be at least one approach for us to think about. And taking this, again, an idea and really simplifying it down to its essence, like a pentatonic scale, 5 notes. What can I do with those 5 notes? How creative can I be? It can be a lot less intimidating and really help us to start expanding some of our different concepts.
Yeah, so 2 things. Moving on. We had 2 requests. So one was for a funk tune. We're going to do that in a minute here. There's one we've all played a bunch called The Chicken. And then we'll each go through and kind of talk about, we had one person ask what our most influential player was each, and I'm sure we have a lot, but I can think of a couple that would be top of my list. So yeah, let's start with The Chicken here. And we'll probably go down the road here, or down the row here. What's your most influential player? And that's really hard to pick one. I guess if I think of the time that really made me know that I wanted to play the saxophone, I wanted to be a saxophone player, why I like all the funk stuff so much, why I like jazz, probably Michael Brecker. My first year in college, he came as a guest artist, And I was a mix between a music major and a computer science major, and I instantly dropped that computer science part out of my head. Still love that kind of stuff, but I did not realize the saxophone could sound like Michael Brecker sounded. And actually, it was recently would have been his birthday, I think his 69th birthday. And he passed away a number of years ago, unfortunately, but what a player. Nobody had virtuoso, well, I shouldn't say nobody, there's plenty of people, but just the way he played, his virtuosic style, the fact that he'd play really killing jazz stuff over some really funky stuff, like it just has and always will blow my mind. But some of my other favorites, I play a lot of alto as well. I love Kenny Garrett, I love Phil Woods, Cannonball Adderley, Charlie Parker. There's too many to name. Some modern players who are still around. If you haven't checked out Joel Fromm, check out Joel Fromm, John Gordon, Dick Oates. Yeah, there's so many players out there. But boy, if you've never listened to Michael Brecker, get on YouTube and listen to some Michael Brecker. He's great. Want to go next, Keith?
Yeah,
Delta
good.
City Blues is a comment.
Yes, Delta City Blues. Woo!
Oh, Lord. Good. So somebody commented they were guessing that one of my inspirations was Kai Winding. Actually, I love Kai's playing, but actually it was somebody he did a lot of work with who was really my first trombone inspiration, J.J. Johnson. For those of you who have not listened to J.J. Johnson, please go out, do yourself a favor, listen to some J.J. He's amazing. You never hear him put a note wrong ever. And he was somebody who he really came up in, kind of the post big band era, going into the bebop and then hard bop and beyond. And he could do bebop when he wanted. He just didn't want to very often. He was such a melodic player. He had just an infinitely creative mind when it came to melody. An unbelievable writer. You listen to a lot of his albums. He's got such really great arranging. Some of it was kind of avant-garde for the time. You listen to some of the Jay and Kai recordings. He did a number of albums with Kai Winding, kind of two trombones, the rhythm section. He had some unbelievably creative arrangements going on at the time that, frankly, you listen to it, it's like, boy, that's a little avant-garde, given what else, everything else was going on. When he went off, he had a very successful career in Hollywood, doing a lot of writing out there. An amazing person. But like Dave said, there have been so many others as well. I've been a big fan of Curtis Fuller for a very long time. Honestly, one of the people who I think kind of encapsulates a lot of what I try to do is Irby Green. Irby is someone who unbelievably versatile in what he did. He could turn around in 1 second be playing just the most beautiful ballad, Tommy Dorsey style ballad you can imagine, and the next minute doing very, very traditional, legit Dixieland, and then turning around and doing very, very honest bebop as well. I, as a player myself, I kind of pride myself on being versatile, and so I think I've really looked to Irby to help provide a lot of inspiration with that.
And for inspirations, I had somebody guess Ray Brown. That's an awesome guess. It's not really someone I listen to a lot, but his philosophy was awesome for that because what he said was always get a great sound first. Everything else comes after. You just need a good bass sound that drives the band, and that's exactly what I want to do with it. I think as far as jazz bass players that I listen to, it's got to be Edgar Meyer and Niels Henning Orsted Peterson. And Niels is because I listen to Joe Pass a lot, because I also play guitar and I really want that kind of melodic stuff in my playing. Niels did it better than anybody. So I would say those two, definitely Niels and Edgar Meyer. And we're going to hit with a tune called There Will Be Another You, right?
There will never be another you.
Never.
There'll be another me, probably.
Good. By the way, we had a request for some Glenn Miller. I don't know if we'll have any of that on the docket here today, but we'll have.
We forgot to bring our orchestra.
Yeah.
we weren't allowed to fit them all in a room like this.
That's true, right? Yeah, you'd have to be in a huge auditorium.
Someone also mentioned drummer. I guess we could have put him over on the other side of the room. But I don't know how well you can hear, but it is really a different challenge to play with one rhythm section player. And tons of props to Matt for holding us together, because that is it's not an easy job to hold us together. So
right.
Here we go. You
Good.
want to start on it? You want to take it off the top?
Sure. Why don't you take the head? I'll come in on the second time.
Okay. 1, 2, 1.
Thank
Cool. That was fun. So let's take a look here. Couple questions we got asked. You listed influences that were players of instruments you play, and are there influences of instruments you don't play? Yes, we'll get to that in a second, and we'll kind of all go through that again. One of the things we kind of want to talk about, and we mostly stayed on track, was playing fours, trading fours. That's a great exercise to work on your ears and to steal licks from your friends and come up with playing cohesively if you do it right. And it's not always easy to do right. I really like playing fours because it challenges me to use my ears, to listen to my fellow players. And basically what that means, if you're not familiar with it, is I play 4 bars, Keith plays 4 bars, Matt plays 4 bars, and we go in a circle. Sometimes you'll do it up and back with a drummer. But let's just for fun, let's take it back at the top and trade fours and go through a couple courses of that. Maybe I'll even take it a little bit slower, and we're going to really try to hone in on each other and quote each other and be as goofy as we can about it. And then we'll get to that question as well. All right, right from the top. You want to start? I'll start. Yeah,
You got it.
Just not mess it up yet. 1, 2, 1, 2, Cool. So, yeah, that's a great, if you're ever doing a jam session or if you're ever playing with friends, do that. And what I really like about that is consciously really thinking about trying to fit in. And what I realize is sometimes I revert to licks that I play all the time, or I'll just play what I was thinking I was going to play, and I forget I was supposed to be listening to Keith, or I forget I was supposed to be listening to Matt. And when I feel like a gig or a performance is going really well is when, oh yeah, we're actually all playing music together. So trading fours is a good, in my mind, it's a good test for that. And I fail as much as I succeed, or maybe a little bit more, but it's something I challenge myself with all the time. As far as a couple questions here. First of all, influencers aside from saxophone players, I have a lot. Boy, I tend to like keyboard players. Like I'm a big Chick Corea fan. I like Herbie Hancock. Boy, tons of people, but I've worn out a couple of Herbie Hancock albums, so he's probably the most. Speaking of playing musically, there's just, some of his stuff is just beautifully, beautifully musically, and then he can also do some really crazy, funky stuff. How about you, Keith?
Good. Dave mentioned somebody who, especially kind of early on in my career, when I really started getting into jazz and jazz improvisation, somebody who I wanted to sound like, and I've been trying for a long time, was Michael Brecker. I saw him. Dave mentioned that he'd seen Michael Brecker live at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire Jazz Festival. I was at that festival, but I didn't know who Michael Brecker was yet. And so I was a dumb high school student, and I saw him, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then the next year, I had this tenor saxophone player friend who said, hey, you've got to listen to this album. And I'm pretty sure it was Tales from the Hudson, and it blew my mind. And of course, I kicked myself after that. He was here, I saw him live, and I didn't appreciate how good he was. So he's been somebody who's really been kind of in my mind for a very, very long time. There's been a lot of others. I seem to, outside trombone players, I seem to really lean towards tenor sax players. Wayne Shorter is just another, somebody who I spent a lot of time listening to, especially kind of in his Miles era, and a lot of the albums he was doing with people like Chick and Tony Williams and that whole crew that they had making albums. I really love all of that stuff. And the kind of cohesiveness Dave was talking about. I mean, whether it was Herbie's albums or whatever it might have been, you could hear a lot of this, the coalescing of a lot of different ideas coming through and all of these, which I think were really, really awesome as well. So those are still folks I still go back and listen to, very regularly.
And for non-bass or guitar influences, it's definitely sax players for me. I have an absolute favorite. It's Jeff Coffin, more modern pentatonic jazz usually, but he also goes way out there and has a killer sound. Also, I've got to say the people I but came through the scene playing with, especially Dave, because I started gigging in the Twin Cities with him. He was a huge influence on me, so I got to hear his stuff all the time. I got to hear other local players.
Now it's the other way around.
No, but I would say the local players who I got to learn from are where I get most of my info from. So I would say they're the way.
And I wanted to answer another one. Sydney, you wrote this in twice, so I want to make sure I get it. For a high school student graduating this year, I don't know where to go with my musical life. You and almost every other high schooler is all I'll say. And myself, when I graduated high school, I think my dad's on this stream. He probably could post some recordings of how I sounded as I was coming out of high school. And if I mentioned before, I was between music and computer science, and I wasn't sure because I was a far below mediocre player. I managed to get into the School of Music, but I remember my first lesson, my saxophone teacher said, wow, you have got a lot of catching up to do. And it destroyed me. It broke my heart because I came from a high school where I was the best in my high school. I wasn't even close in college, and my high school just, it wasn't one of those that had the ridiculous high school players like some do now. And all I'd say is keep playing, find opportunities to play, listen a lot. You would be surprised. The first time I spent any time in New York and went to some jam sessions, I was terrified, like hands shaking, terrified. And mostly everybody was cool. And some of those players were 10 times the player I'll ever be. And this is New York, New York has a reputation for if you're not doing well, they'll let you know. But they were super cool for the most part. And I got a lot of good guidance, and I just kept working. And pretty much throughout my life, every gig I've gotten, my first gig after college was, and I thought I'd really caught up, was a cruise ship gig. And I believe my musical director told me I had 2 weeks to be a better player or he's going to send me home. And I managed to not get fired. And so it's little accomplishments like that. I will tell you the best players I know, the best players I've ever worked with are all self-conscious about their playing. They're all constantly in their own head about they're not good enough. And that's usually what makes them good enough. There's exceptions, but I know a lot of really not great players who think they're amazing players too. And so I think part of the drive as a musician to be good is knowing that, hey, I'm not there yet. I'm never going to be where I want to be, but I'm always getting better. And I think that's what motivates all of us. I think if you asked Keith or Matt, are you an amazing musician? I doubt they would say yes. So yeah, wherever you are, just keep working on it. Find opportunities to play. Find a local jam session. Start a jam session. Play along with play-along tracks. The first YouTube video I put up that actually ended up getting a lot of views, I was just in a hotel room and bored, and I was testing out my camera. I was actually a little embarrassed of my playing and thought, yeah, but the mic turned out well, so I'll put it up there, and people ended up liking it. And so I've consistently been shocked even when Matt said that, he liked my play. So yeah, it's that I don't take compliments well that way, but what I would say is, yeah, just keep playing. Don't let any of that stuff get you down. And if you love music and you love playing, don't get in your head about it too much. I know that's easier said than done. And make as much music as you can, and you'll advance. That's all it really takes.
What do you think, Dave? Should we we've had a couple other requests for
Sure.
some cannonball for stuff. Should we maybe finish up with the last one, do you think, or what do you?
You know, we don't have to do that, Bern. We could do what's a good cannonball tune? We could do Mercy Mercy. Are you guys comfortable with
Yeah.
that? People seem to be liking the little funkier stuff.
That
I like those people.
I think so.
All right, so we got a request for some Cannonball Adderley. Cannonball Adderley is famous for playing this one. It was actually Joe Zawinul on this, right? And I don't know if it's in here, but
It's not.
you guys know?
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, I gotta use my brain. All right, so thank you very much, guys, for tuning in.
Yeah.
This has been a blast for us. I'm impressed this many people showed up on the live stream. And we're gonna hope to do more of these in the future, even when we're not in, these interesting times. This was fun, and I'd love to do more of these. And when we have the opportunity, we certainly will. And we're individually gonna be putting stuff up on our channels as well. Our store, just a quick note before we finish up here. Our store closes, we're taking place in the shelter, the stay-at-home initiative, just like everybody else. But we'll have equipment. We're going to be recording videos. We'll have our email. We'll have our cell phones. So if you need anything, if you have any questions, reach out to us. All our contact information is on the saxophone shop, the trombone shop. If you have a question for Matt, he'll be around somewhere. Just send it to one of us, and we'll see if he's available to answer a question. But yeah, we're here to help, and especially now, we're going to have a lot of time stuck at home, but hey, we'll be practicing and making music and helping you guys out in any way we can. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, we'll finish up with, I almost said work set, huh?
That's right. The other
Mercy,
one.
mercy, mercy. You want to start with the jam? 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you very much, guys. Again, everybody, we will